Thank you very much, Jesimpes. And it's been a series of very informative, instructive, and enlightening talks, uh, at least a modicum of which one should have got from the media. Unfortunately, you need to attend webinars these days to know the state of the nation. That's indicative of the distortion that we are facing, the in-your-face distortion as far as how representative the media, the news media today is. As we speak, I am astounded that Thomas Isaac is not able to join us because of an income tax raid on the NIFB. It's again something that has happened in the period of the lockdown. A new tactic, it seems it's becoming a kind of, perfected to an art, that before an election, you unleash the CBI, the ED, the income tax, and any other central agencies, customs in the case of Kerala as well, to a place where elections are to take place. And the role of these agencies is to play the role of a road roller, literally, to smash any kind of opposition or any strong voices of dissent or protest or dissonance with what the ruling party or the government stands for. And then in fact, these should come under the purview of the Election Commission. You can't be doing this. And the media has not analyzed this process. I mean, the media should really be speaking about it. The media takes these as isolated events, that there's been a raid. Yesterday, I think there was a raid in Tamil Nadu, in a DMK former minister's home. And apparently, there are loose reports. There's never any definite information about what the raid revealed or what the raid unearthed. It's really meant to muddy the waters, to create a smokescreen, to create disinformation and misinformation and use that for electoral advantage. So I think these are all connected, which is why I mention it, because as somebody said, we are in a situation where you have the right of free speech guaranteed by the Constitution, but you don't have any right after free speech. What happens to you after free speech remains to be seen. Similarly, you have the right of free voting. You also have the right of winning an election, but you don't have the right to form a government, as we've seen in state after state after state. The ones who win the election form the government, soon to be destabilized through political skullduggery, through work of the Dirty Works Department. And so these are areas which I think are in your face. And if we thought that the fourth estate or the fourth pillar of democracy, along with, let us say, the judiciary, would stand up to this erosion of our constitution, literally, the erosion of our rights guaranteed under the Constitution, we have been in for very serious disappointment. The COVID-19, the plague or the pandemic, has a particular framework, and the lockdown has perhaps a slightly smaller framework. And yet, it's very interesting, the kind of things that are happening during this plague are reminiscent, if you like, historically of other plagues as well. I happen to stumble on, Othello, for instance, Shakespeare's Othello. As somebody said, it's more than, it's probably much ado about a handkerchief, but it's more than that. It's about racism. It's a kind of study of othering. Othello himself, the Moor, as he's characterized, and what happens, and the series of events that take place. And there's been a study which says that from, let's say, 1564 to 1674, that is through Shakespeare and till the death of John Milton, which is, I think, synchronous with what you understand as the English Renaissance, there is also an undercurrent of the story of plague or several plagues. And each of these take a toll on society. They are constitutive of value shifts in society, and those are reflected brilliantly in Shakespeare's Othello, for instance. And from that really belongs to the culture part. There's another speaker who's going to speak about it. But I remembered this when I think it was Jesimpes who was speaking about the the Tablighi effect, you have a contemporary resonance there. If they had a chance, I mean, if they could get away with it, we would have believed that it was the Tablighi convention that led to COVID-19 in India, or rather led to the spurt or led to the pervasiveness of COVID-19 in India. Just as we speak, we know what's happening in the United States, what are characterized as Asians are being attacked because they are seen as the harbingers of the plague, or those who have brought in the plague into the US. And of course, the definition of the Asian in the US, which is, astonishingly ignorant about geography, is also makes the matter even more difficult, because all kinds of people who look different are clubbed as Asians. So there are all these implications before us when we look at what the media has done or should be doing, or what is happening to the media in this space. I think it's fair to say that one section of the media has covered the lockdown and the implications of COVID-19, particularly the social implications, the political implications, more than the rest, and that is the standalone digital media in this country. The mainstream media should have done far, far more. The mainstream media has been pulling its punches and looking almost apologetic about the way it's pulling its punches. The mainstream media is, as Pierre Bourdieu said, one of the characteristics of the media is dig here when you should be digging there. Because, if you dig there, you'll find something. You don't want to find something, you should dig all around it. So the mainstream media will tell you about everything else except what you want to know and what is very vital and what is waiting to be told. Whereas I think the standalone digital media has done an admirable job, has done a bold job, against all odds, because these are the media organizations which don't have the wherewithal to fight the kind of power and might of the state, particularly of a growingly authoritarian state. And yet they've done rather well. And I think that's been compiled in a recent book by Sehmat, where they've given us samplings of the kind of coverage that the media has given this period of the lockdown, which was declared so abruptly and so whimsically, and has brought about untold miseries, as has been catalogued through yesterday and today on an entire nation, particularly the deprived sections of its population. Now, looking at what the media has done, there are lots of sins of omission and commission. There's a lot of, shall we say, glossing over. There is media and media and media, unfortunately now. There always was, but I think the fragmentation in the media, the split loyalties in the media, the opportunism in sections of the media is far starker today than, to my mind, ever before. Perhaps, during the emergency, all of media was snuffed out. So it was a kind of blanket, shall we say, equitable kind of blanket kind of proscription of the media. Now you have a situation where sections of the media are collusive, are complicit in what the state is doing, what the state is unjustly doing. Sections of the media don't have the backbone to stand up to the state. They lay themselves supine, they lay themselves prostrate before the marauding, measures of the state. And a section of the media tries to speak truth to power and pays a price repeatedly. And the last example of that was the notification by the Electronics and Information Ministry, which essentially, by fiat, by ordinance, through a notification, sets external regulation on the digital media. And media, by definition, is indivisible. But what is happening is there is an attempt to divide and rule the media through these processes that I've spoken about. The less said about that collusive, complicit part of the media, we know who they are, what they are, the better, because it's not even worth a while to discuss that, because that is an apology for a media. That is not news media. That is a propaganda arm of the government. If they call themselves that, there's no quarrel with it. That's a cat's paw of the authorities, of those in power. The mainstream media, who have the clout, who have the wherewithal, who have the staying power, and who I would think should have the resilience to be critical. One doesn't have to be sensationally critical, to be at least solidly critical and stolidly critical, has unfortunately also been folding up, has also been buckling under the kind of measures that we are seeing. And that is a cause for serious concern. And what the government is doing is, through a process of divide and rule, they are literally suborning the media. They're literally making the media an also-ran in the process. Technologically, there are some reasons. We know that with the arrival of the social media, with the arrival of the possibility of direct communication with constituencies for political leaders, particularly intolerant leaders or authoritarian leaders, give short shrift to the media. They don't even give a press conference. Our Prime Minister hasn't given a press conference to the media ever since he was elected. But because like Trump, for instance, they're able to speak to their constituency. They tweet every morning, they write on their Facebook, they have their Man Ki Baat, which is the government media, which is fine. And therefore, they have also shown that the media doesn't matter. So it's not as if they are making any bones about this matter. The media, as far as the government is concerned, as far as as long as you are not a thorn on my side, it doesn't matter. You do what you like. But if you question things that I'm doing, if you question our measures, our policy measures, particularly in particular vital areas, if you question our ideology, if you question the party behind us, and you become a problem for us, then we'll crack down on you. And it's as simple as that. This is something we are seeing day in and day out. It's in your face, and I don't have to give examples of that. And the media, for instance, I've implicated in a case where, the Sudarshan TV case. It's still sub judice. The case is being adjourned in the Supreme Court, where a program which is tantamount to hate speech of a Muslim community, is aired, and it creates shock and naturally creates huge resentment. The matter goes to court. The program has now, of course, been stopped. It's no longer being telecast, and yet the argument on the other side is that hate speech is freedom of speech. It's tantamount. They're not saying it in as many words, that Article 19, 1A and G gives us freedom of speech and expression, and therefore we are allowed to have hate speech. And they make a very fine distinction between offensive speech and hate speech. Of course, there's a fine distinction. I think offensive speech is perhaps legitimate in a democracy, because freedom of speech must mean I must be able to say something which others don't like. Otherwise, there's no need for freedom of speech, right? There's no need for an institutional or constitutional guarantee of a freedom of speech. If all of us are to agree, and if I can't say something which offends you, I don't agree with what you say, but I'll defend to my death your right to say it. That's the principle, right? But hate speech, obviously, is nothing to do with offensive speech. Hate speech would be using an offensive term or a stigmatic term for someone in a particular caste, for instance. At least in the SC/ST atrocities, there's an act against that. You cannot use certain terms. You cannot do certain things. Those will be characterized as punishable under law. You should bring in a separate legislation for that. So you can't argue that Article 19(1) gives me freedom of speech and expression. Therefore, I will use hate speech to other. I will use hate speech to stigmatize. I'll use hate speech, and that is a true. This is one extreme kind of position that is taken. And on the other hand, of course, there is a chilling effect. There is preemptive censorship, and there is formal censorship, which has now come in with this notification that I mentioned, which all of you know. But just to put it in a sense, what it essentially means is that if anybody goes, if there's a grievance from anybody about something that appears on a digital portal, this now it seems to be applicable to digital portals alone, not to the print media or television, because the government's argument is that print media has the Press Council of India, and the television channels have the Broadcasting Association or the Broadcasting Code. Except that it's apples and oranges. What the Press Council of India is not a body which controls or regulates the freedom of the press. Certainly, you can go to the Press Council of India with a grievance. The Press Council makes recommendations to the paper concerned, or it gives a directive, and an apology or a correction is made. There's no teeth. The Press Council of India doesn't have teeth. If it had, it would be a clear external regulator. It's not an external regulator in that sense. So too with the Broadcasting Council of India, right? The Broadcasting Association, which is a voluntary body of broadcasters, which sometimes wraps someone who is, for excesses or for falling foul of the broadcasting code that all those who are licensed to broadcast in this country sign up to. Whereas here, what it essentially means is, if there is a grievance, the grievance has to be taken up, has to be published on the portal, and there's a 3-tier process in which it should be dealt with. First, by your own internal media organization, and failing the settlement of the grievance, the satisfaction of the first complainant, it goes up to a body of the group, what you call the industry body of, let's say in this case, a digital body. There's a body of that kind, which is headed by a maybe retired justice or a well-known public figure. And if it's still not settled there, it goes up to a interministerial committee comprising of bureaucrats, not below the rank of joint secretary. In other words, a group of joint secretaries is the appellate body. So if I have a grievance and I'm not happy with the way the grievance is dealt with by, say, Portal A, nor by the body that represents the digital body, I can go to this interministerial body, and what they say, what this group of bureaucrats say, will be mandatory, will be binding. It also gives the Secretary Information and Broadcasting powers in an emergency, in inverted commas, to yank a portal off the air, to ask, to boycott, to ask them to blank out news. And the government has done that, even without all these powers recently, because of the reporting on the Delhi riots. 2 channels in Kerala, AsiaNet, which I happen to be the founder of in the good old days, I'm no longer associated with it, and another channel called Media One, were both asked to stop telecast. And after several hours, of course, it was restored. And the explanation from the INB minister was even more fascinating. He said it was a bureaucratic mistake. The same bureaucrats are given this appellate power for as far as digital portals are concerned. So it's a cause for great concern. I'm surprised there isn't a backlash of the kind that one would expect in the media about this, because the print media thinks they are insulated from it, so it's not their problem, so they don't want to raise too much of a fuss about it. The electronic media, I think the television channels too think it doesn't apply to them. It's about these digital portals. There's probably also a sense of some envy and competition, because digital portals seem to be doing better work of disseminating news, investigating news, and telling the news, speaking truth to power than these more settled and time-tested, but media are. But this kind of divide and rule is happening without realizing that the media, by definition, should be indivisible. And if one section of the media is made to capitulate like this, it's a matter of when, not if, before the others are also a casualty to the process. So this is one of the big things that has happened very recently during this lockdown. The lockdown has been used as a smokescreen, as somebody said, I think as Vikas said, as a smokescreen, as a kind of filter, as a kind of alibi, in order to push through all kinds of measures that the government wanted. What is essentially happening is that the basic features of the Constitution are being hit, and the Supreme Court, in my opinion, should ab initio take notice of this, and so more to initiate proceedings against it, because the basic features of the Constitution are sacred. They cannot even be overridden in Parliament, and yet that is happening in slow degrees, in a creeping manner. That's happening. Look at the idea of separation of powers, which is a basic feature of the Constitution. Today, if you look at the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and the fourth estate, or the fourth pillar of democracy, you'll find that there is a constant surrogation of the 3 latter ones to the executive. The executive is arrogating all power to itself, so much so that India has been characterized in international bodies which look at democracies as an electoral autocracy. That's the term used, I believe, an electoral autocracy. Recently, Freedom House has actually degraded India's position as a democracy and call it a part democracy or partly a democracy, which is a kind of insult to us. I mean, it's an international embarrassment. So, as far as the legislature goes, you know how the powers of the legislature are being eroded. You don't have any discussion worth the while in Parliament. You see, you're passing bills as if you're issuing ordinances. The only difference is it's on the floor of the House. You don't allow time for debate. You bulldoze all opposition, and then you say this has been a very productive Lok Sabha session because you've just not had any discussion or debate on anything. You have just passed bill after bill after bill. You've seen what's happening in Delhi, giving more powers to the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. One would think that there's no scope for an elected representative in Delhi. What is the Aam Aadmi Party's government all about? What is Kejriwal as Chief Minister all about? If you predefine that the Lieutenant Governor is a final person who has to be consulted and who perhaps has to give his nod or approval on anything that really matters. That's been also pushed through. So the legislature has been compromised. The judiciary, unfortunately, the judiciary, you see, it's a bit like an ostrich's egg, good in parts. Sometimes you see some good measures. You see that the Supreme Court will rule that if you say anything against the government, it's not necessarily sedition. There's another good ruling on an editor we have seen yesterday or today. But on the other hand, you also see that the Supreme Court is very muted, is almost, like a silent spectator, when you can see that these are affecting the Constitution, the constitutional values that the Supreme Court, I would imagine, has the mandate and has the power to protect. What is worse, I sometimes find the suo moto kind of action by some of the judges, certainly. Recently, there was a judge of the Supreme Court who was literally telling the government that your guidelines to the OTT have no teeth. These particular, even these information, the notification I was talking about, because it talks also about how OTT platforms should function. That you should have very strict laws in place, that there should be punitive action. I mean, this kind of language was being used. And the Solicitor General, obliges and says, yes, we will bring in certain laws. So it's almost like a nudge and wink, to the executive to get more draconian, to get more tough with the media. So what kind of signal are we sending, to society? So in other words, instead of a healthy checks and balances between the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and I believe the fourth estate is also part of this power of, this separation of powers schema. What we have is a collapse of all of this under the overweening power and the power of the executive. And this has been happening in this period of the lockdown because it has not got the notice that it should. Nobody, to my knowledge, is talking about this with any great concern, with any seriousness. There's no debate about this in the media itself. Whereas this affects the Constitution very, very seriously. This affects our rights very, very seriously. And therefore, I would think that what is happening now seems to be a return, to old principles of if you say anything against the government of the day, it is tantamount to sedition. I mean, this is the kind of mindset. And sedition is being used as if it's a very light law. It's like, you find somebody for smoking on the street. Sedition is becoming the credibility of some of these laws, being stood up to ridicule. In the history of the development of journalism as far back as the 18th century, beginning of 18th century, there was a Chief Justice Holt who said, and I quote, "If men should not be called to account for possessing the people with an ill opinion of the government, no government can subsist. For it is very necessary for every government that the people should have a good opinion of it." That seems to be the mindset now. And this was the origin of the idea of truth not being a defense in cases of libel. It is with great struggle by journalists over several centuries, in fact, that truth is finally allowed as a defense in a case of libel. Before that, the rule was the greater the truth, the greater the libel. It doesn't matter that what you said is true, as long as it is seen as affecting the government or what you call scandalum magnetum, affecting or scandalizing the magnates in the realm, you're damned. And the jury, even a jury process, jury only had the power to say whether the person did indeed say that or not to judge whether that was legal or illegal. Only the judge did that. So I thought we had crossed all that. It looks like we're lapsing back to a time where one has to be careful about what one says about a bill in parliament, about an act, passed by parliament, about policy measures by the government, because you are likely to be charged with all kinds of, maybe under the UAPA or maybe under the Sedition Act or under any of these draconian laws that we are living with. So this is the danger of our times in terms of the media. And the media itself has hardly shown the guts or the power to respond to this. We have two kinds of media, I think, broadly, to elaborate. One is where, the complicit media, which has been, whose role or his function belongs to what, idea of truth being, as Nietzsche said, the history of truth is the history of the longest lasting falsehood. So you repeat a lie, you repeat a lie, you repeat a lie, it becomes, that is the Nazi propaganda model, right? And there's a section of the media which does that with such gusto, so assiduously, day after day after day, on prime time, on the news hour. They will say the same lie, repeat the same falsehood. And you can't blame a good section of the people who are not initiated into what the underlying issues are, of even beginning to think maybe what he's saying is true. Otherwise, why would he say it again and again and again and again? And on the other hand, you have, Yevtushenko said famously that when truth is replaced by silence, that silence is a lie. And you have a good section of the media who plays that safe kind of role. They keep silent, not realizing that if you say silent, especially as a media, when you should be speaking out what you see, when you should be conveying to your viewers, your readers, to your listeners, what you see as particularly what you see as unjust, that silence is a lie. It's tantamount to a lie. So the media is lying in different forms to the people. And if that is the representative role of the media, I think the COVID-19 situation and the lockdown situation has been a great enabler for the government, for the state, to actually make the media that even more redundant. Technologically, it was becoming redundant, I would argue, and now it's become even more redundant politically and through the combination of circumstances that we have. So these are the home truths that we have to live with. And unless the people see the media as a fourth pillar of democracy, and unless the fourth pillar of democracy doesn't become the fifth column of democracy in parts, there is a big danger that we are not going to be a democracy too much longer. This might sound like a very rash or a harsh or an extremist or an alarmist kind of statement, but I do believe so, because I think the sine qua non of democracy, the rationale, the raison d'etre of democracy, is that there must be freedom of expression. If you must say democracy in one breath, you must be able to say a free media in the next breath. Otherwise, you have democracies all around us. Erdogan is elected by the people, of Turkey. The Philippine president is elected by the people. Even Singapore, there's democracy, but there's no freedom of the press. There's no political freedom of the press in Singapore. You have perhaps financial free press there. So unless you have a free press, a free and a freewheeling press, that democracy is, as Freedom House would say, only a part democracy. I am afraid we are already slipping into that situation. We have had a very vibrant democracy. We have had a history of a very vibrant democracy, of a very combative democracy, of a free and a freewheeling democracy. And that is being compromised at this conjuncture where a pandemic and a lockdown to combat that pandemic, whose distortions we have been hearing and talking about yesterday and today, and an agenda to actually tame the media, because the media is not convenient for a government which wants to do what it wants to do in this particular context. I think in this circumstance, it becomes very, very important for the media, I think, for the people, not so much the media. Media is unlikely to be self-reflective about it. The media will only, I think, reform if there is a pressure from its constituency, the viewers, the readers. And I'm surprised that there isn't any action in terms of the consumers of the media, because after all, we are speaking about the media as a market model. We have arrived at an idea of the media as a player in the market. The market model of the media is widely accepted, and the market model of the media, at least I, as a consumer of the media, should have my consumer rights, the rights of a consumer. If I go to the market and buy a product which instead of soap, which instead of cleaning my clothes, scratches my skin, I can go to a consumer court. Has anyone gone to the a court of law and said this media has been corrupting me, has been giving me false information, has been poisoning the amity in my house for the last 7 years, so I claim damages? I think if you look at it objectively, that's what a section of the media does. But there is this whole idea of the media enjoying a moral high ground, a constitutional high ground, which it should. But I think the media is digging its own grave by its pathetic performance, particularly in times as challenged as these. I'll conclude by saying that Umberto Eco put this in the form of a conundrum. He said, in a democracy, there is, as we said, the executive, the judiciary, the legislature, the judiciary, and then the fourth pillar of democracy. And while the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary are answerable, are accountable to the people directly, because the executive through the legislature because every 5 years you have to get the people's vote, the judiciary also because notionally we know you can impeach a judge with 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament. We came close to it twice or thrice. The last time we came very close to it, but I think kind of wisdom prevailed because you didn't want to drag the fair name of the judiciary into the mud, and so one didn't pursue with it basically. But it is the fourth estate, or the fourth pillar of democracy, says Eco, which is not so institutionally or constitutionally accountable. Because if it were to be, one of the other three pillars has to supervise that accountability, and therefore that will not therefore be a free media. It's a conundrum. And therefore, he says, the free media has to put itself in the dock and ask of itself whether it is doing justly by the mandate that the people have given it, whether the moral high ground in our case, or the constitutional high ground. In the United States, at least, it's a constitutional high ground, because it's prescribed. Congress shall make no laws which abridge the freedom of the press, says the First Amendment of the US Constitution. We have nothing like that here. We only have the derivative rights from Article 19, 1A and G of the Constitution, which speak about freedom of speech and expression and freedom to practice any profession. And therefore, I think that is the idea of self-regulation. And one of the big, I think, body blows to the media has been the latest blow, that of course, this is in court now, in both in Kerala and in Delhi. In Kerala, Live Law, an organization, has challenged it. And in Delhi, some of the digital portals have challenged it. And unless this is overturned by the court, this is going to be the death knell of a free media in India. I have no doubt about that. I'll end by saying the Justice Y.V. Chandrachud, not the current Justice in the Supreme Court, his father, Justice Y.V. Chandrachud, in the wake of the emergency, in the famous Minerva Mills versus Union of India case, spoke about 3 articles in the Constitution, which he said makes a difference between Tagore's dream of the future of where the mind is, into the heaven of freedom, let my country awake. Tagore's dream of that, and an authoritarian regime. 3 articles, he said. And these subsequently, I think Serva and others have called this a golden triangle in terms of the fundamental rights of our Constitution. One is Article 14, which speaks about equality under the law and equal protection under the law. Article 19, 1A and J, which we have spoken about, freedom of speech and expression, freedom to practice any profession. And Article 21, which speaks about the right to life and personal liberty. They have made such a mockery of the constitutional process. They've eroded the Constitution to such an extent by a combination of overbearing authoritarian measures from the top and the street, the lynch mob mentality from the bottom, that today we are in a paradoxical, a funny situation where if I want to exercise, or if I exercise my rights under Article 14 and Article 19, equality under the law, equal protection under the law, and right to freedom of speech and expression, I ipso facto forfeit my right under Article 21, right to life and personal liberty. As Gauri Lankesh, Pensare, Dabolkar, Akhlaq, many others have realized. So you have a funny situation in the Constitution where if you exercise your fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression, you forfeit your right to life and personal liberty. And therefore, it's high time, I think, the Supreme Court must actually take cognizance of this and intervene to set this distortion and functional distortion right, and And the media must, of course, develop a backbone if it has lost it. And the section of the media, I think more power to the section of the media which continues to fight, which continues to speak truth to power, not intimidated by all that the state is doing to cow it down. Thank you very much.